Long before there was even such a thing as the MCU, superhero fans have been delighted by comic book legend Stan Lee's many cameos in works based on his characters. But what if we told you these cameos contain way more details than you first thought? No matter how you slice it, Stan Lee is the face of the entire Marvel Universe, as well as the co-creator of a substantial amount of the most iconic superheroes of the last 60 years. With a legacy approximately the size of Galactus' helmet, it's no wonder nearly every single piece of media based on Stan the Man's characters and the universe that formed around them ends up featuring the hero dispenser in any manner of bit roles. Whether he's playing himself, voicing one of his own characters, or just being a notable bystander in the action, spotting him is always a delight. But his characters are rarely just quick throwaways. There's usually at least a few more funny details to be spotted for a sharp-eyed viewer. So in this video, we're going to go over some of the more interesting aspects of Stan's many guest roles in the vast web of superhero media. Stan Lee made many cameos before Iron Man kicked off the MCU that we know and love today. Not just in the iconic 2000 Spider-Man and X-Men film trilogies, but also in several cartoons during the 90s, where he would often at the very least narrate. But his first live-action appearance dates about a decade further back from his baffled X-Men hot dog vendor. Lee's first movie cameo was in the TV movie Trial of the Incredible Hulk from 1989, a film made as a distant finale to the Incredible Hulk TV series that ran from 1978 to 1982, starring bodybuilder Lou Ferrigno as the not-so-jolly Green Giant, while pulling double duty as a pilot for a never-produced Daredevil TV series. Here, Lee can be seen as the jury foreman during a dream sequence. And as an extra fun detail, both Lee and Ferrigno have cameos in Ang Lee's Hulk movie from 2003 as security guards at Bruce Banner's laboratory. Even the briefest of cameos can have a lot to unpack. When Stan first appears in Captain America: The First Avenger, it's as an army officer who mistakes a random man for Captain America during a press conference and remarks,
"I thought he'd be taller."
Odd as it is to write Stan as not being familiar with Captain America at a first glance, it makes a little bit more sense when you know the character's history. After all, unlike the initial Avengers, Stan didn't actually co-create Captain America. However, when Stan got his start at Marvel Comics, known back then as Timely Comics, it was as a writer for Captain America back in 1941. In fact, he was the one to come up with the idea of Captain America using his circular shield as a throwing weapon in a backup story of the third issue. On top of that, Stan had a big role in reintroducing Captain America to comic book readers in the Avengers issue number 4 in 1964. Stan may not be Captain America's creator, but he certainly added many of the things that we associate with him today. One of Stan's stranger cameos might be in the Guardians of the Galaxy, where he, despite the movie taking place somewhere in outer space, appears as a normal human talking to a younger woman. The binoculars we see him through post all sorts of details about him in an alien language, but one of these words is written in a language familiar to Marvel fans. More specifically, it's the language of the green shape-shifting Skrulls. Using the Skrulls alphabet from Marvel's Secret Invasion comic book storyline, the text translates to the word Excelsior, which people know as one of Stan's many catchphrases. It was originally used to cap off his writings in the humorous Stan soapbox segments of Marvel Comics all the way from 1965 till 2001. And if you actually look up the word, it is a Latin word that translates to even higher or ever upwards. Considering how far Marvel Comics and Stan's many characters have risen throughout the decades, it's an oddly prophetic catchphrase indeed. When Captain Marvel was released in 2019, Stan's first posthumous live-action cameo ended up being fittingly sweet, as Carol Danvers shoots him a warm smile when she spots him on the bus reading a film script. More specifically, it's the script for the Kevin Smith comedy film Mallrats from 1995, the same year that Captain Marvel takes place, where Stan makes an appearance. Fitting, since the movie is about a pair of comic book geeks and the film's writer and director Kevin Smith is one himself. And since Mallrats released in October 1995 and Captain Marvel was released and presumably takes place in March, he might very well have been on his way to set. Although for clarity's sake, Stan didn't actually create the Carol Danvers version of Captain Marvel. He did, however, co-create the Walter Lawson version of Captain Marvel, also known by his alien name of Mar-Vell. That is to say, Mar-Vell is the first Marvel Captain Marvel, not the DC Captain Marvel, who can't be called Captain Marvel anymore, partially because of several Marvel Captain Marvels, neither of which are to be confused with Marvel Man, who originally was DC's Captain Marvel, or MF Enterprises' Captain Marvel from 1966, who isn't the Marvel Captain Marvel named Mar-Vell from 1967. Are you confused yet? Because so am I. Anybody got an aspirin? Anyways, going back to Mallrats, Stan's cameo in that film actually marks one of the very few times he has ever objected to or altered his cameo. By his own admission, he almost always simply showed up and did his part as it was written with no complaints. But there was a sweet little personal touch to his heartfelt speech to the film's protagonist, comic book collector Brody, whose girlfriend has just broken up with him due to his slacker nature. Here, Stan claims to have created many Marvel characters as reflections of his own feelings after an old flame left him. The emotional scene then ends with the humorous reveal that it was all a made-up story meant to motivate Brody. Originally, the bit was written as a genuine story, but he suggested making it a lie instead. After all, he wouldn't want to hurt his lovely wife Joan's feelings, considering she was not only very supportive of his work, but also encouraged him to create the Fantastic Four, the family that gave birth to the rest of the Marvel Universe as we know it. Speaking of Joan, she did get an MCU cameo alongside her husband, aside from that time in Fox's X-Men Apocalypse. Well, sort of. When the time-traveling shenanigans of Avengers Endgame kicked into gear and Tony and Cap ended up in the 1970s, a digitally de-aged Stan doing his last live-action MCU cameo drives past a military base and shouts, "Hey man, make love, not war!" It might already be enough bonus trivia to know that the lady riding with him is a digital recreation of his late wife. But there's another cool little detail to it. See Stan's outfit? It's almost a complete recreation of his fashion sense from the 1970s, proving once and for all that Stan has been looking fly for decades. Due to the many successful Marvel films, Stan Lee became so synonymous with the superhero film genre that he even managed to pop up in a DC Comics-based film, namely Teen Titans Go to the Movies, based on the hit Cartoon Network series Teen Titans Go.
I don't care if it's a DC movie.
Given that the movie constantly parodies the superhero movie business as a whole, of course Stan just can't help but pop up once the Titans make it to Hollywood for what he describes as a subtle cameo. Now, did any of those poses look familiar? Well, they should. They're almost all evocative of some of his most famous characters. In rapid succession, we get the Spider-Man web shooting, Wolverine's claws, the Iron Man landing, and even some Hulk and Cyclops poses thrown in for good measure. Guess being animated did wonders for the old man's agility. Not even apparent throwaway jokes are entirely safe from being packed with detail. Way back in the first Iron Man film, the movie that kicked off the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Tony Stark quickly walks past a red-clad Stan surrounded by young women, erroneously addressing him as Heff. This is a joke about Stan Lee's uncanny resemblance to the Playboy magazine founder and publisher Hugh Heffner. But the two don't just look alike. They were also fairly good friends in real life, given that Hugh was actually a lifelong comic book fan and supporter, and used to pay much higher rates than everyone else for the comics that he published in Playboy magazine back in the day. Stan and Hugh's friendship went far enough that they were in talks to create a humorous Playboy universe superhero cartoon called Super Bunnies back in 2004, although sadly it didn't get made. Not that most female superhero costumes aren't already basically Playboy outfits anyways, but I digress. Given that the gag is repeated in Iron Man 2, where Tony Stark mistakes Stan Lee for famous talk show host Larry King, one starts to wonder if Stan getting his name wrong in Civil War is actually just him finally getting a bit of payback.
Are you Tony Stank?
Yes, this is Tony Stank.
Now here's a more complicated one. While the only character in the Netflix Marvel Defenders line that Stan actually had a hand in creating was Daredevil, he still appears in all those shows and photographs, referred to as Irving Forbush. This is not just a random silly name, however. Irving Forbush was originally a character Stan Lee and Jack Kirby made up for the comic book Snafu in 1955, meant to be competitor to Mad Magazine. Stan would later use Forbush, now apparently a gopher at Marvel Comics, as the butt of several jokes in the aforementioned Stan's soapbox. Eventually, Forbush became Forbush Man after his aunt hit him on the head with a cooking pot, and he soon took a spot as a mascot of the parody magazine Not Brand Etch, which basically consisted of Marvel talent making fun of themselves. Forbush Man's misadventures in this Marvel parody universe lasted for 13 issues from 1967 to 1969, with a special 14th issue produced in 2017. After Stan's death, one particular cameo became all the more poignant, that being his animated appearance in the critically lauded Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, where he plays the costume shop owner from whom Miles Morales purchases his first, rather cheap Spider-Man costume, and who gives him some sage advice on the way. Beautiful as this scene is, and as hard as it struck the hearts of every Stan Lee fan alive, it's actually not his only appearance in the movie. He can be spotted in several places in New York. such as on the subway, and his iconic glasses are added in the credits in order to pay proper tribute to his legacy. But the real treat is the credit scene parodying the famous 1967 Spider-Man cartoon and all its modern-day memes, where Stan voices J. Jonah Jameson himself, a character he has always claimed he wanted to play someday, and who has even been rumored to have been created for that specific reason. Well, Stan, your wish finally came true, and true to form, your performance was a huge highlight in an already spectacular movie based on your already amazing character. What an astonishing end to a truly sensational career. In all seriousness, while Stan may be gone, the impact he had on the world, his characters whose stories have wowed generations, and the sheer delight his cameos gave us, whether they be humorous or heartstring tugging, will most definitely never be forgotten. And as Stan himself would put it, that's enough said.